Tony Backick's presentation provided an overview and facts on global agriculture and Australia's agricultural sector. He looked at its challenges and the opportunities. Tony also highlighted the continuing challenge of dry salinity and how it plays out in Australian agricultural production. Another challenge he sees is how to balance and translate paradigm-shifting discoveries into agricultural practice and consumer acceptance. Now, this is difficult when you're working at the cutting edge of agricultural science. Tony used the controversy surrounding genetically modified food, or GM crops, as an example that met strong consumer resistance, despite its obvious potential. Tony also discusses the challenge of abiotic stress on crops and plants. Events such as droughts, floods, extreme temperatures, salinity, and pathogen attacks, they impact negatively on the growth and yield of seeds and cropping. Therefore, there is urgency to develop crop varieties that are resilient to abiotic stresses to ensure food security and safety for the years to come. So please enjoy Tony Backick's presentation.
Say after all those presentations, hopefully I can give you a slightly different perspective, but you're going to see some of the same, in fact, some of the same slides in there as well. I must thank Joe for taking me down memory lane this morning, because I grew up in just south of Innisfail and Tully, which is the heart of the banana growing area, and where the viral outbreak is as we speak now. That's where it originated, which could devastate the banana industry in Australia. So what I want to actually say to you is that there's never been a more exciting time to be in research and development in the industries, but there's also significant challenges, and I think we shouldn't overcome them. The technology is there to solve these challenges, but there are quite a few roadblocks along the way in this. And when we think about the research and development innovation pipeline in Australia, there's a lot of disconnects actually. And in this room, we all talk about agri-food as one thing, but actually when you go out there in the sector and you look at, we have a Department of Agriculture, we have funding cycles and RDCs that fund agriculture, they stop at the farm gate. They're really not interested in what happens post-farm gate. And that to me is a serious challenge right there, and they're paid, the farmers are mostly paid on yield. And we all now know that what we really need to move to is quality, not yield, because we're never going to compete on yield. There's the Starns out there in cereals, for example, that can produce wheat much cheaper than us. So we've got to go for the quality end of things, not for the yield end. But everything is geared towards yield in terms of how the payments go. At the other end of the spectrum now, we'll see there's a complete disconnect between the Departments of Health and the Departments of Agriculture. The whole health sector has been driven for many years around solving disease problems. In fact, people aren't predominantly dying from disease now. It's actually non-communicable food and health-related diseases that they're dying from, not from bacteria or something else like that. And that's having the biggest impost on health budgets, and in fact, but there still remains a disconnect between the research and development and connecting these industries up. So I just want to go through some of these things and then talk to you about it, the new institute that we've just established at La Trobe to do that. So some of this you will see, but slightly from different perspectives. I'm not going to go through this because everyone's seen these numbers now. $66 billion industry, heading for $100 billion, mostly export. We feed far more people than we have. But one thing I would like to say that sort of people have glossed over a bit is that the output, sorry, I'll get these buttons right. The outputs are actually nearly static now. We've plateaued with a lot of these yield increases, and a lot of people gloss over that because they sort of, if you do it over a big span, it looks like it's still trending upwards, but it's not. So we're actually globally in what's called a perfect storm, and this is one over my hometown in Tully. This is Yarsi at the time. Luckily, my mother's house survived. We had hoped it would blow away. She wasn't there, but we moved her. We moved her, and we were hoping it would blow away so she'd get a new home. But anyway, she wanted to come back there, and it didn't work in that case. So you've seen this trend line here. The 9 billion people. But if you look at this trend line over here, we currently don't have a food shortage, okay? The food shortage is geopolitical. It's it can be solved. People shouldn't be starving. It's geopolitical. But if you actually trend outwards to this 9 to 10 billion people, whoever you are, there will be a real shortage. There's no doubt about that. But we do have the technology now and the biology to change this trend line to, in fact, feed this population. But it's going to require a lot of changes and a lot of challenges. And in fact, a lot of consumer resistance probably in a number of areas to actually implementing this, and health challenges. So you've seen this number. So we have to basically, increase by 70% the amount of food calories that we're producing. And so it can't be a business as usual scenario. That's just not going to cut the mustard. And that's where I think this lack of connectedness in the research and innovation and development pipeline needs to be resolved, because it's as big here as it is in most other countries. So here's the challenges. We've heard about the climate change, global warming, whatever word politically is correct or not. Everyone knows it's warming. No scientist debates that it's not warming. The question is that they debate over is, what do you allocate that warming to? And of course the politicians love that from that point of view. But it's getting warmer. If you look at the trend maps and you can go there, you could see from when they started, they're getting redder and redder. There's land and water constraints. Agriculture, it turns out, is not a very environmentally friendly. It's a necessity, it's an essential, but it's not environmentally friendly. 70% of the Earth's water is used in agriculture. And as we heard just before, the trends to eat more protein here is actually exacerbating that situation, because in fact to produce a kilo of wheat versus a kilo of protein from a cow, it takes anywhere between 6 and 20 times more water to get that protein from an animal than it does from a plant. So there's huge constraints there. We heard about the increased urbanisation. You just have to look around Melbourne where it's spreading out to a lot of our prime growing areas for our vegetables and agriculture, Werribee, etc. Environmental degradation is a major issue. The ecological footprint, 25% of the greenhouse gases are produced by agriculture, and there's measures to stop that. And we now know increasingly that there's a need to connect food quality with human nutrition, with health outcomes. And so essentially we're being asked to increase food production by some 70% in what will be a smaller footprint, land footprint, to do that, with in fact the need to use less resources to produce that. And the other thing we have to, and which is a big issue now, is the anti-science thing around this sort of area. So at one extreme, we have the technologies, and I'll talk about some of these, to actually increase production and overcome this plateau that's there. But we have huge consumer pushback in society around this. So the same people who will very happily take a drug if they're sick, that's produced by GM technologies, will argue vehemently about the GM in food. And we can talk about this later, but it's paradoxical, because they will not question where the drug comes from, how that drug is made. That's irrelevant to them if it's going to cure them. But as soon as they should have the choice of what food they have, I don't have a problem with about that. But when they try and impose that on others who actually do need to and don't have the choice about how much food they can get, then I think there's an issue, and we have to sort of address this as a society. We happily put our washing powders down the sink, which contain bacteria, which are all made by GM technology. Quite happily do that. Take insulin, etc., but have a conversation with anyone, a logical one, about a GM food, and all of a sudden you evoke all sorts of things. And I'll talk a little bit about the superfood debate too, and this is where I think we have another problem, is between the food industry, which has very much been historically driven around processing. That's really been the mantra, is you process everything to death, then all of a sudden our health issues are coming back and people start adding things back, and in fact what we now know is probably the best thing was to start with the whole food itself to begin with. So we've got a whole supply chain that has some issues around it that needs to be addressed. The other issue in Australia, of course, is unique to Australia, and that's dryland salinity. This is because of our agricultural practices. we have unique there amongst world producers this dryland salinity issue and the stresses that come around with the abiotic stresses that come there. And of course you all know that we've got this new National Farmers Federation edict about going to 100 billion. So that's a 70% increase in 12 years. And the question is, how are we going to do that under what is really a more constrained, a smaller land mass that we're going to be able to do it, because salinisation is clearly reducing how much agricultural land we have, and we have the issues of global warming and temperatures, etc. Some years ago, the Clinton actually commissioned a report in the US president from MIT to ask, how is America going to remain competitive in its agricultural production systems? And the MIT report came through with this term called convergence. And it was really the convergence of a whole lot of biological, mathematical, computational, engineering solutions to do this, which all rely on big data, which we've heard about. And the technology, and I'll talk a little bit about this, how it's changed, and it's technology that's driven actually these opportunities in biology. But more recently, there's just a report now, if you go to the National Academies of Sciences in the US, a realisation that if they're actually going to implement a lot of these solutions, we have to bring society along with us. So the social and economic arguments are now just as powerful, and in fact they're probably the things that are dragging the implementation of a lot of these things, this consumer acceptance around this place. So we need to have the increased resilience, sustainability, efficiency, productivity, quality, but all that comes to naught if we don't get consumer acceptance. And there it becomes a real issue as to how you decipher the hype from the truth because of the marketing side of things. So these are the convergences that we saw before that were drawn up in 2011 around biology, with the advent of the sequencing, the first genome, the human genome that was sequenced, which I might say is small by comparison to most crop genomes. You hate to say that. Everyone thought the human genome was the most complex and had the most number of genes. In fact, it's pretty average from that point of view when it comes to crop genomes and things like that. So at the turn of the century, it took 15 years and $3 billion to sequence the human genome, which is about $1 a base, because we've got about 3 billion. Now, you can sequence a human genome in no time, cost you anywhere between $100 and $1,000 who you're paying for. But it's how you mine that data that you generate now from that. So we can actually now, using the technology that's come from the sequencing capabilities, the many omics technologies, we have no end of data now. The question is, how do we mine that data to do that? And that's where the computational firepower comes in as well, and the bioinformatics stuff. But now we have to superimpose this onto it, and really it's bringing in the whole sort of producer adoption, policy design, farmer acceptance, consumer acceptance, regulatory environments, etc. Without lining these up, the rest of this stuff really sits there in abeyance. So the areas that have now been identified in terms of the new approaches and new opportunities, and I would really suggest you read this report. It's quite useful. There's an Australian Academy one as well, but it's nowhere near in the breadth of this coverage that this is. So this is this transdisciplinary research and the systems approach to that. Now this is a term that was used in the engineering field for many years, the systems approach. In the biology, it never did. Well, it actually did many years ago. When you did biology, you did natural sciences, and you did do ecosystems, and you did systems. Then we deconstructed it between the 1950s and the 2000s because we wanted to know exactly what everything was. Now we're reconstructing back from the DNA to the whole cell. The sensing technologies, which you've all heard about, data science and agri-food informatics is a big area. Genomics and precision breeding is an area, and microbiomes, which we've just heard, and I'll come back to. But the other considerations are around this as well now, is the infrastructure that's needed. Are we at the right scale in Australia to actually deliver through this pipeline? And I would say we're not in a lot of cases, and that comes down to the funding. situation. It comes down to the state, federal issues. We do need to re-educate a workforce that is literate in robotics, engineering, etc., etc. The modern farmer is and agri-business is a very different one and I wish I was those hoes had come along before. As a kid, I spent a lot of time in the chipping hose, walking up and down the fields, digging out weeds, which are a wasted part of my life. But anyway, my father thought it was good for me for some reason. But of course, there's socio-economic considerations. So this is all through now these high-throughput genomic tools that we're talking about and how we can use this infrastructure now to mine the information, because there's no way the human mind can mine it. And whilst we've heard a few comments say that it's all in our DNA, it's actually not all in our DNA. It's actually the DNA confronted by the environment that is actually a major player, because the environment has a major impact on our DNA. And part of that environment is what we eat, and that impacts hugely, and that's where the microbiome thing comes in. So you can't just do the DNA. It doesn't tell you all the information you need, because we're only about 0.1% different to a mouse anyway. So it's sort of, and we're all different, as you know, and we're all influenced by our environment. So we've got to move out of this sort of observational, historical. We've now got all the information. What we now need to do is be able to use this information using smart machines, etc., informatic tools, genomics tools, to actually be able to predict what's going on. So just as an example, and this is where we're sort of right on this cusp of this genetic revolution, if you want to call it that, is that if you look at biodiversity, there's something like 400,000 plants. For 10,000 years, there was cultivated 7,000 of these, some 20,000 for medicinal purposes. So what a lot of people don't realise is that half our medicines actually derive from plant products as well. Another reason to support plant sciences. But now what we've done is about 30. So we've gone from about 7,000 that used to be cultivated down to about 30. And out of these 30, you can probably half a dozen are responsible for providing the nutrition for most of the world's population. So, and as a consequence of the classical breeding tools we've used, we've lost a lot of key genes, key traits that are now becoming critical around abiotic and biotic stress environments. So this is the physical environment, and of course this is the biological environment that we have to fight off, and you saw in the sprays and things. And now also what we did do through that is we actually bred out quality in a lot of cases, and we're rebreeding it in, unfortunately. But the fortunate thing is that we do have the biological diversity out there, and if you look at the grasses, which are our major crops worldwide really in terms of giving nutrition, there's an amazing diversity. You know, they can grow from the Antarctic into our deserts, and so the genes are there, the systems are there. The question is, they're multi-gene traits, and the question is, how do we reintroduce those into plants? And the technologies are there now to do this, but they're controversial from the consumer point of view. The other thing that we have to now do is, and something we've realised as biologists for a long time, is we find genes single genes that give you increased tolerance to X in the glasshouse. And rarely do these things scale out into the field. And so what now to get the increases in yield that we need to do, we need to be able to do measurements on this G type E scale in the real environment, because you know, when we grow a plant in a glasshouse, it's optimal. It's got nothing exposed to it. It's got the right temperature. It's got the light, etc., etc. But that's not what happens out in this real world out here. So we have to be able to grow in large phenotyping things and look for very small changes through these plots. And this is what the drones, and now what's a whole new set of imaging around cameras, the hyperspectral imaging that comes in. That not just, I mean, we've been using it for years to give us yield in crops and things like that, and total yield. But what we want to do now is be able to use this technology to measure particular components within the grain, not just the total grain yield, but actually what the carbohydrate content is or what the protein content is and when would it be best to harvest it at that point. And this is where this technology is now going and integrating it with the biology, because we can now put these out in the field in large plots and see how they respond in a real environmental situation. So Latrobe, as you know, with this precinct development's been discussed a little bit, is now working very closely with state and federal government to develop a precinct around this, around Latrobe. And this is AgriBio here, where I've just moved to after many years away. I am a Latrobe graduate, way back before the dawn of time. But the areas that the focus will be around here is, as you can see, agri-science and food, health and wellness and digital technologies, all of which have played a major part today in this. So the question is, what we're interested in is, you know, how do we increase and do sustainable agriculture? And what I want to do is, and I've been advocating this for a while in Australia, we have a world-class plant sciences research, agricultural research. We have a world-class biomedical sector, and the two rarely talk to each other. And yet, as I said earlier, where the real health costs in the budgets are going is in and around food quality issues, and we do need to link those up. And training is another whole big area. So the areas that we're going to focus on is soils and agronomy, obvious why. I mean, Australia does remarkably well in what it produces, but to be honest, most of our land is very marginal. You know, we produce at much lower rates. It's broadacre agriculture. There's very few bits of land, maybe on the Darling Downs, that would match anything in Europe or, you know, in the prairies, etc. And the other two of these around seeds fit for purpose and quality dietary fibre. And the last one, which I'll mention and you heard about yesterday, is medicinal agriculture. And why do we talk about this fit for purpose seeds and quality dietary fibre? So this is one look at evolution. And of course, you know, in the last 10,000 years since the advent of agriculture, production of crops and things like that, we've completely changed very quickly, much faster than our DNA has been able to evolve. But there's another view of human evolution, and that's this one here. And this has happened in 50 years to 70 years, in the last part, the second half of the last century to now. And you know, this is the saying now, is how what we eat becomes what we are. And there's never been a truer saying. And this is really around food quality. And it's mostly around carbohydrates now. People pretty well understand the fat metabolism and protein metabolism. And where there's this huge gap now is around carbohydrates, because carbohydrates stretch from, you know, the nasty sugars, sucrose, fructose. Fructose is a really bad one, right through to soluble dietary fibre, which we absolutely have to have. And just as an example, and why I think that we need to integrate this food production and consumption and the ag and food sectors, is here in this set of figures. We've all heard we produce $60-odd billion worth of agri-food, and what's it costing our health budget at the moment? More than that. And these are all diet, food-related diseases. Now, some of them are just ones that obviously are to do with volume. That's a slightly different volume issue. But a lot of these are diabetes, type 2 diabetes, colorectal cancers, heart disease, etc., is what we put in and what our microbiome and how it responds is absolutely critical. And if that's not a figure that should make us really start to bring the connectedness between the agri-food and the health sectors, I'm not sure what is. And I can tell you that the projections are just blowing out. I was recently in China, and all of you will know with the Mao Revolution, it was all about they were a net importer of food. The priority was just grow more rice, you know, essentially rice, because that's what they have. And so they did that, and that's what the plant scientists, the breeders did, is gave Mao the increased rice production. We were there last year, and the Minister for Health said, we've got to stop trying to increase yields. We've actually got to increase the quality of our rice. Because he said the biggest thing that's now blowing out their budget and is the biggest problem for them is the quality of the rice. Because You know, we do all sorts of things with rice that we used to do historically in the past for good reasons. For example, you know, most of the goodness is already there, but we go and make it white rice. We sort of take the husks off, which contain all the minerals and all the other essential goodies. Now, we did that historically because you couldn't store it. Otherwise, it'd go rancid. So they dehusked it. We don't have those problems now. You know, there's no reason to do it, but it's become ingrained in the culture. And an example of this is, you know, now there's a blindness caused because of lack of vitamin A deficiency in rice. The technology's there. They're ready to roll the technology out through Asia that could solve pretty well all the issues to do with blindness in children that's coming from this deficiency. But because it's yellow, it's seen as tainted, and therefore we don't want to eat it. It's poor quality. There's nothing wrong with the quality, and it's actually good for your health. But, you know, that's the situation we're in. So what I would argue, we really need to start to connect the systems up. I talked about other ones, about the agriculture, the food processing pipeline. You know, we go for a medical research fund that everybody's quite happy to fund of $20 billion, which is a great initiative. It's fantastic. I'm fully supportive of it. But given the importance of agriculture and food to the nation, why is there an equivalent fund, future fund, that can allow us to work at the scale in which we can actually deliver this innovation and deliver it in a way that the consumer wants to take up and that becomes healthier as well? The last bit, and somebody mentioned the other day about the problems of regulation. Now, that's the great strength of Australia, is we do have a very good regulatory environment and a very good policy environment. But it can do with some significant refining. And if you think that there's regulatory issues within the food industry, then just sort of have a quick look across what's happening now in this environment. It's huge opportunities, massive opportunities for medicinal agriculture. Believe it or not, we're already a major producer. In terms of illicit poppies, we produce half the world's opiates. They used to be all in Tasmania, and now they had to move to Victoria and New South Wales because the Tasmanian industry nearly got wiped out 5 years ago because of downy mildew. So now there's a major program, part of a new centre we've just been funded with, is to breed varieties that are able to grow with high yield in Victoria and also be disease resistant. The other one, of course, which nobody knows what the value of, is medicinal cannabis. Because that's an illicit drug, the regulatory environment around trying to do research and development, if we are going to develop this, and we do have an opportunity, Australia has a unique opportunity to be a major player in the medicinal cannabis market worldwide, but we have to do the R&D. But it is another level once you get involved with the Office of Drug Control and the various state and regulatory authorities to even do an experiment, even though you can go and buy it across, or find it somewhere across the street, as somebody said, over there. But there's this huge thing about if it gets out from our lab with a few milligrams of this stuff, which would have no effect at all in comparison. Anyway, I'll leave you there. I think that we're on the verge of a really exciting time, but we do have to take a more holistic approach, connect all the dots, and also realise that even though the solutions are there, the consumers need to be taken along. And that's something that, as science and technologists, we've never been really good at. You know, we're all happy to use technology to death with our mobile phones, and et cetera, but when it comes to putting technology into our food production cycle, we're happy to do it in the drugs. On the food side of things, there's a few other debates to be had. So thanks very much, and happy to discuss it.